Well, good morning, everyone. I want to welcome you to our conversation, the four-part formula for preventing cyber attacks. We're going to explore how you can build cyber resilience in your organization and stay secure. My name is Rob Schenk. I'm with Intelligent Technical Solutions. We specialize in helping small and medium-sized businesses thrive by managing and securing their technology. A few housekeeping notes before we get into it. Our conversation is going to run around 35 minutes or so. We'll stick around after to answer any questions. The conversation will be recorded, so if you'd like to review any of the information at your convenience, you'll be able to do so after the webinar, and we'll send that recording afterwards. Happy to take questions during the webinar. We'd like to make this as collaborative as possible. You'll see a Q&A link in your Zoom toolbar. Please go ahead and submit any questions that you have there, and we'll have some time at the end for some Q&A. Next slide here. So you'll notice a QR code in the bottom right corner of the slides. That's going to lead to a special offer for attendees of the webinar. In case you need to leave early, you might want to scan that for later. For today's discussion, though, I'd like to welcome our special guest, Earl Fischl. Earl brings over 21 years of cyber experience and data analytics to Field Effect. His experience spans operations, strategic management, and government service. He's got a unique background in political science, which helps him approach cybersecurity not only as a technical challenge, but also as a sophisticated espionage issue. And he's blending technical and strategic perspectives seamlessly. So welcome, Earl. Look forward to the conversation.
Thanks, Rob. Nice to be here.
All righty, just to get things started here, we're going to review today's agenda for today's discussion. We're going to be reviewing the definition of risk management and its benefits. We'll talk through the phases of cybersecurity risk management. We'll talk about some common cybersecurity risks that we face. We'll also talk about some challenges that businesses are often encountering. And then to finish things up, we'll review some actionable strategies and specific how-tos that will help our companies out there lower and manage their ongoing cybersecurity risk. Alrighty, so let's get started, Earl. So what do companies need to be thinking about as they start their risk management journey? Let's kick it off with that.
Absolutely, yeah. What we're going to take you through today is, as Rob mentioned, kind of a four-part formula or recipe for thinking about and approaching your risk management. We're going to take you through identification, assessment, response, and monitoring as those four components where we would like you to begin. And we're going to kind of dive into each of those in a little bit more detail. At the identification stage, we'll talk about understanding the environment that we're responsible for and the risks present facing it. At assessment, we'll talk about mapping those risks to our environment, understanding the likelihood of risks being realized, those sorts of things, and ensuring that we have response capabilities and the linkage to monitoring that follows after that as well. So we're going to take you through that, which is really the beginning point.
Great. So what's kind of contributed, like there's some kind of scary numbers up on that screen there, 215 billion. So what's contributed to the rise? It seems like you can't turn on the news these days without hearing about the latest cyber attack and so forth. Maybe you can talk about what's causing this spike.
Yeah, absolutely. So the numbers that we're sharing with you here about the spend on risk management, the jump, as we know in recent years, has a lot to do with a combination of things. The first, I would say, as Rob kind of alluded to, has to do with our attention and our awareness to the rise in cybersecurity risks that we face as businesses, well as organizations of all types, frankly, and also the recognition that it is a kind of a multifaceted bit of work to do risk management well. And so there's a recognition that risk management is not simply about IT and traditional IT management, but there's a broader set of activities under risk management that's caught our collective attention. And that is important for us as businesses to have at play to help manage risk.
Great. So if I'm a business, why should I be looking into this? What's the benefit for my organization?
Absolutely. The risks the benefits are kind of evident in the name. What we're trying to do here is manage, ultimately minimize risk, and ideally proactively. So what we're trying to do is understand where risks are likely to be realized, eliminate those as quickly as we can. You can think about this in the context of physical security for our homes or apartments, wherein we lock our doors behind us when we are out to ensure that we don't have surprises waiting for us when we get home. And so in the context of our IT management responsibilities, what we're trying to do is understand and then eliminate or reduce risks as early as possible. So this obviously matters to us as business owners from an expenditure point of view, and it also impacts us from a brand protection sensibility and the absolute pointy end of the spear are our IT teams, for whom ideally we're absolving them of as much worry and risk as we can by attending to risk management early and proactively.
It's interesting because a lot of small businesses I'll talk to, maybe they don't have any specific kind of regulatory requirement. They kind of, I think in their heads, they think they're kind of flying under the radar. They don't have any data that anybody's going to be really care about too much. They won't be a target. What about companies like that that are kind of don't quite, what would you say to them?
Yeah, I would say to all organizations, even if we don't have any sort of regulatory or perhaps even insurance obligations in the context of cybersecurity risk management, we have an obligation to protect our staff, our vendors, our clients, and the information about them that we hold. We know as a point of fact, unfortunately, that threat actors are from financial gain perspective, happy to take money from whomever they can. So even inserting themselves into our HR processes and tampering with employee payments is something that we have to make sure that we're protecting against as well. So even if we're not under an obligation from a compliance framework, or we don't consider ourselves holders of vast quantities of personally identifiable information or sensitive financial information, we actually do, as business owners and operators, have a fair amount of valuable personal information, even just about ourselves and our teams.
Yeah, makes sense. So let's start talking about the types of cyber risks that companies are exposed to or vulnerable to. Maybe you can talk through some of that.
Absolutely. So we're going to go through a set of examples so that reflect sort of classes or categories of risk here. What you're going to see is a couple of patterns. The first is sort of headline grabbing threats of the sort that you'll have recognized just as a matter of paying attention to what's going on in the world of IT security these days. And we're also going to talk about some of the threats that relate to the complexity of managing our IT environments and how those are exploited here. So yeah, let's dive right into the first one. So the first group or category that we're going to take you through here is a combination that most of us face constantly, just as a natural byproduct of being IT users, which has to do with the maintenance of the software that we're using. The top example that we have here, unpatched software, kind of speaks for itself in the name. What we're talking about here is software applications that have either past some normal update cycle, Patch Tuesday as an example, most of us are familiar with hearing about, or for which a vulnerability might have made the news that the software needs to address and be updated or patched to take care of. Unpatched software is it's difficult to have really refined numbers, but probably close to half of how most attacks begin is the exploitation of software that's internet facing. And we're going to talk about a few more examples, but that is effectively not up to date. The second example that we have on here, end of life software, we wanted to highlight this one separately because it's reflective of, again, like we mentioned earlier, some of the complexity in the space of risk management. It's not uncommon to have software in our environments that vendors, for a multitude of different reasons, no longer support. And this is a tricky business for us as IT professionals who need to strike the right balance between migrating to whatever is new and appropriate, perhaps investing in some sort of extended service package, and these types of scenarios. The key here that we want to highlight for everyone is the need to manage this risk awareness in particular, over time. That's the key takeaway from here. It's unfortunately not entirely uncommon, particularly if an IT team has transition in staff over time, that things like the management of end-of-life software sort of fall through the gaps. So this is a key pair of examples that we like to highlight here.
Yeah, I'll just chime in that, we're running into this end of life software like right now because Windows 10 is going to be end of life and Windows 11 is going to become the standard. And that's happening, I think, in Q3 of this year. So many companies are going to start that transition from Windows 10 to Windows 11. And that's something that often takes a lot of budgeting and planning to go ahead and make that a seamless upgrade and migration.
Absolutely. Yeah. And this is actually another key moment, and we can flip to the next slide, but just a key point to highlight where small IT teams are particularly challenged to manage a complex software environment over time. Very, very difficult.
For sure.
The ne Yeah. The next set of risks, again, reflective of the same similar category, has to do with vulnerable operating systems and browsers. And we wanted to highlight these distinct from software just in general for a couple of reasons. Um, We'll start with operating systems and kind of get that one out of the way and then go into browsers, which is a little bit more salacious these days. But operating systems are a complex component of our IT environments to manage. And they're very frequently targeted by threat actors. Microsoft and many vendors have great programs for managing this, but the actual day-to-day operations of maintaining operating system security isn't trivial at all, especially if we have like a multi-operating system environment, which might be common in some of your contexts, Windows, Macintosh, the many flavors of Linux. All of these come together and put tremendous pressure on the IT team to make sure that they're maintaining the patch levels just for the operating system alone. The next piece, and the not more important, but maybe in terms of likelihood of targeting these days, are browsers. Browsers are our gateway, our window to the internet, and they are targeted accordingly by threat actors. And this is why it's is absolutely essential that our browsers are up to date and that we maintain vigilance around them. The browser is, as I said, the gateway to the internet, but it's also a window into which threat actors have begun trying to insert themselves any number of different ways. You might have heard of terms like malvertising, meaning malicious advertising, wherein threat actors know that an unpatched browser can be attacked with just a hyperlink. So they will pay money through advertising programs to get their hyperlinks in front of potential victims. So this sort of browser awareness is super essential. The other thing that
Yeah.
you'll hear about, oh yeah, sorry, Rob, you go. I know
Okay.
exactly where you're going to go. The other thing you'll hear about are extensions, which I think we're going to highlight as one key piece that's recently made news and should be on everyone's mind.
Yeah, for sure. It's funny you mentioned Chrome. Just last in 2024, Chrome itself had, I think, 10 zero-day vulnerabilities alone. And you mentioned if I'm running a zero-day vulnerable Chrome browser and I happen to click on one of those things, there's no defense at that point unless you patch that particular Chrome browser. And so it's kind of challenging for many companies to keep the browser. If you have 10 updates that are coming out, and it's kind of like ad hoc. You don't know when it's coming. You need to be ready for it, and having some sort of a comprehensive system that allows you to keep the browsers up to date as these vulnerabilities come out, it also becomes really, really important.
Yes, absolutely. We're going to hit on this as we move through and then talk about our four phases. Yes, the requirement for vigilance over time and sort of the complex nature of managing that and the visibility of it is a key challenge for our teams. Yeah, and so yeah, we can jump into the next one. So exposed RDP meaning remote desktop protocol. This is sort of a classic, quite frankly, from a risk management perspective and a threat actor perspective. But what it really represents is a couple of risk factors for us as organizations. One is just maintaining an awareness of the types of services that we have exposed to the internet, RDP being one and a very, very powerful one. FTP is another, file transfer protocol, and there are others. But what these afford us as organizations is the ability for us to do remote administration, to have remote workers who can access devices from wherever they are in the world. But ultimately, as well, we know it allows threat actors to do the same. If they can find an exposed service like RDP that is not well protected, they can do things, as you have no doubt heard, like brute force attack or password spraying attacks, where they will just try logging into that exposed service with all of the passwords that have ever been published until eventually one works. This is an extraordinarily common initial point of entry for a lot of ransomware gangs and threat actors of many, many types. And RDP is it is the key protocol in this context, but it's reflective of a class of exposed service risks that we need to make sure that we're managing.
Yeah, we see that not RDP being used not just for system administration, but you mentioned remote workers. Oftentimes, remote workers are leveraging an RDP-like system to go ahead and access an internally hosted critical application. And oftentimes, those may not be protected via like two-factor authentication, where you get a code to your phone or you get a authenticator app, and that becomes a, like you mentioned, that this password spraying. If you don't have a second factor locking down your system, you're even more exposed.
Yes, absolutely. And it's worth highlighting as well while we're talking about RDP that we've even begun to see threat actors use social engineering as a way to target RDP. They will use a phishing email to try and convince the end user to change their RDP configuration to expose it to the threat actor. So, these sorts of access points to our network are well known and well understood and aggressively targeted by threat actors. So we need to understand whether they're present in our environment, and as Rob highlighted, take advantage of the layers of defense that we can apply to them. And the same applies to FTP, SFTP, VPN use, all of these, RDP being representative of that class.
For sure.
Our next set of examples is, again, kind of an extension of the unupdated or unpatched system challenge that we all face, but it relates to the protection of our data, both as it moves through our networks and is transferred to partners or vendors and those sorts of things, but also as it remains at rest in our networks as well. So the examples that we want to highlight here have to do with outdated protocols and encryption technology. So in the context of outdated protocols, there's a few important things to consider. First of all, some of these protocols might be attackable. They might have weaknesses that a remote attacker can take advantage of to gain access to systems. Very likely, they might be easily exploitable while data is in movement, meaning the data could be tampered with or stolen, or any number of other issues can happen. The same kind of applies to the encryption technology challenge. And this one's a little bit more forefront on my mind these days because I often see threat actors targeting backup systems, particularly ransomware, as one would expect. And we, of course, as IT professionals, can protect our own backups, not only by isolating them, but also by encrypting them. And this is just a great example where ensuring that we are using the best up-to-date standards for encryption is the approach that we're taking to make sure that our encryption cannot be easily defeated or tampered with as well. It's also important to note in this context here that we might have some requirements, again, related to compliance frameworks that we're responsible for adhering to, or insurance as well, that require that we meet certain standards for data encryption, both, as I said before, as it is at rest and as it moves through our environment. So again, understanding, so having insight into being able to identify the presence of the protocols that we're using to move and hold data and encrypt it, very, very important and key to our risk management long term.
So we've defined risk management. We've reviewed the various types of risk management, along with some methods that threat actors will use to go ahead and infiltrate our companies. So let's talk through some of the challenges. Maybe you can review that for us, Earl.
Yes, absolutely. So we're going to talk through kind of three key challenges or areas of challenge, frankly, because there's quite a bit going on within each one, but they will resonate. So the first is about complexity. And I often say that really what we're doing in the context of cybersecurity risk management is managing complexity. It is the key challenge to everything that we're talking about here is getting our hands around what we are responsible for protecting, as IT professionals, mapping what we're responsible for protecting to the threat environment. That alone is incredibly hard. Complexity is inherent in our IT environments. It is especially amplified in the last few years as we saw a movement toward remote work, the integration of more cloud-based services and data storage in our business operations, and the integration of programs like Bring Your Own Device, as an example. These have all had tremendous impact on the complexity as in our IT environments, and of course, made it trickier for our teams to manage that. So the first key challenge that we want to highlight is just about complexity. There are tools and processes, of course, and key investments that we'll talk about that can be made to help reduce this complexity, but it is out of the gate the biggest challenge that we face.
It's funny, we have so many systems that are now so deeply kind of interconnected and it provides a lot of benefits. Hey, I want, information on my fingertips in real time. But behind that or underneath all of that, there's a ton of stuff going on in the background that really kind of makes that magic happen.
Yes, exactly. The metaphor that I like to use just has to do with our cars, which most of us enjoy driving. And if you think about that, behind the dashboard and the simplicity of a steering wheel is incredible complexity. The engineering of all of the cars that we all drive every day is an incredible marvel of complexity. But we enjoy the experience of the simplicity of driving, the distillation of information in the context of that dashboard. And a big part of what we're trying to do for cybersecurity, or in the context of cybersecurity risk management, is not mask that complexity, but distill it down and make it manageable for our teams. Our next challenge, it eats up time, is really a statement on the overall resource challenge that high quality cybersecurity risk management takes, time being one of them. We all know that there is a financial investment as well. Our teams are not free, all of these kinds of things. Key here to keep in mind is that the threat landscape is changing frequently, daily, quite honestly. And attention to that requires time as well, which is a challenge that most organizations really can't attend to, not with the frequency or the degree of attention that would pay the necessary dividend for staying on top of new threats as they're evolving out there. So that's really key. The other piece is that our IT environments change over time as well. So there's a commitment required to attentiveness that is ongoing and needs continuous revisiting over time because our environments change, our users change, our patterns of vendor services will change over time. And so there's an ongoing commitment required that we say eats up time.
And then those challenges then leads to like the need for expertise. So maybe you can dive into that a little bit.
Absolutely. This is a key takeaway and a fun one for someone like me who comes to cybersecurity with a bit of an eclectic or strange background, perhaps even. But if you think about the four phases that we're going to talk about next that we introduced at the beginning, there's a range of different expertise required at each phase. Even in the context of our IT environments, you can think about the different skills that are at play. And how you would bring information together, make good decisions about it, and manage response and monitoring, which we'll talk about next as well.
We've talked about the challenges. Maybe let's get to the crux here. What do businesses really need to know to prevent those attacks that we've been talking about, Earl?
Absolutely, yes. So our four phases are our four components, recipe elements, depending on how you want to look at them. Bring together identification, meaning knowing our environment, the risks that we face in that context, knowing what to do about those threats, and then being able to address them. So we start with identification or identify. And this is the initial challenge that most of our IT teams face, our service providers as well, in the context of IT. The metaphor that I think resonates most simply with most people is the physical security one, where our first challenge is knowing the points of entry, the doors, the outside edges of what it is that we are responsible for, and beginning to gain an initial understanding of the risks that we face because of that.
Yeah, you can't protect what you don't know about, right? So first off, you have to kind of understand the scope, and then from there you can start making intelligent decisions.
Absolutely. Which brings us to our second point, assess. Now, this is about mapping the likelihood of risks being realized to our environment and understanding the impact, the implications, frankly, of certain types of risks being realized. This is an important step from a business perspective where we're making decisions about investments and even the types of services that we're going to use from an IT perspective and how they will fit into our environment and make risk management easier over time. This assessment phase lends itself directly into our third phase, which has to do with response.
So once you understand like the level of exposure and your impact, then we start talking about the respond modes. Maybe you can talk about that a little, Earl.
Mhm. So this is the key moment where hopefully our organizations are reaching a level of maturity, both in terms of our understanding from that identification and assessment phase, meaning we now have our hands around what we're responsible for protecting, and we have tooling and business processes in place as well that allow us to address threats as they emerge or are realized, even by accident as well. Things do happen by accident. But you can see here some examples again drawn from the physical security world. Whereas IT professionals, we would be thinking about things like the implementation of multi-factor authentication as a key control at this response stage.
And then let's talk about the fourth step, monitor. So maybe you can walk us through this one, Earl.
Yeah, this one is, well, frankly, kind of my favorite from my professional background. But yeah, this is about having an awareness, an insight into our IT environments. Good technical monitoring is a critical advantage that we can give our IT teams that allows them to not only see risks as they are emerging, but also other elements of the environment, performance factors, and all kinds of other things that might be optimized better. So in this monitoring phase, if you think about the level of, or sorry, the range of expertise, this is a key area where we can take advantage of the skills and abilities of others to help us keep an eye on things, especially if you think about things like cloud integrations, which have become a big part of many of our businesses in the last few years. This is where monitoring and insight into the activity on those remote cloud services is key for our IT teams as well.
And maybe I can share like a real world example of like how you mentioned cloud monitoring, how that can really help protect a business. This happened actually on Mother's Day of this past year, where we received an alert. This was like at 2 p.m. on a Sunday. And what had happened was a CEO had logged into his Office 365 account, but it was being accessed from Finland. Turned out he wasn't traveling in Finland though. So we went ahead and looked into the situation. It turned out in this particular case, it wasn't a cyber attack, but it was actually the CEO had been setting up an old Android phone that was sitting in his closet for the last year and a half. And he unplugged it and turned it back on and basically was redoing it so he could give it to his kid. And it turned out that he was running a software VPN on this Android phone. And the last time that he actually had used it was at a conference in Finland. So all actually was a legitimate use. There's a lot of known, they have known location, known phone, known account, but that easily could have been the other direction where this could have been a malicious actor trying to, had gained access from Finland, and the system itself would be sophisticated enough to just disable that account in real time. With the main take-home point being that, small businesses responding to threats in real time is really important to preventing, more serious breaches down the road.
Yes, that is a great example of exactly that.
Yeah. So we've talked about like the four phases about basically becoming the foundation of your cyber strategy. So maybe we can talk through that. What should this system have, and what's the strategy that the company should have in place?
Yes. So really, there's five key points, and here they come. If you think about those four phases as kind of a recipe, really what we're talking about is having, as you see here, visibility, ideally full or complete visibility as is possible into the IT environment that we're responsible for. Ideally, we want to automate our prioritization as much as is possible. And really what we mean by that, this relates to the cost of time involved in this work. There are many different tools that can help us prioritize risks, understand whether they're likely to be realized or not. CVSS scoring, which is one measure for vulnerable software that's used in industry, is an example. So threading in prioritization is key. The third point around expert remediation, expert is really fundamental in that. point, this relates to that monitoring and response piece in our phases. What we're after as IT teams is powerful tools to shut down attacks if they happen. Make sure that the gateways into our environment are as small as they possibly can be. And this is where expert remediation and the appropriate tooling is critical. Threat hunting is an interesting and important area. Really, what we want you to take away here is just a reflection of the evolving space of cybersecurity risk, and that it requires investment in time and, again, expertise. So you'll have heard terms like 0 day and all of these kinds of things. There's a whole bunch of work done under the scenes or behind the scenes to contribute to our ability to detect and respond to these threats as they're emerging and changing, and that's threat hunting. Prevention and protection is where it all rolls together and gets bundled up. So we've got great insight. We know what we're responsible for protecting. We know what risks map to it and their likelihood of being realized, and we have tools to address them. So that kind of binds it all together for us.
Yeah, thanks, Earl, for that really important information that businesses really need to kind of keep in mind. What would you say is like just a key takeaway that leaders here should be taking back to their stakeholders?
Yeah, this is a great one. There's a couple pieces. The most important is highlighted here at the bottom, knowing that this is not an insignificant challenge for our organizations, that there's a degree of expertise involved, but that there are powerful tools and teams out there that can help us do this. Finding the right partner is really, really key. This is an evolving space that's going to continue to change over time. Us as business operators, this is an ideally something that we wouldn't want to spend too much time worrying about, just like we don't worry about the shape of the locks on our doors. So finding someone who can help you do this at a really high level is important.
Yeah. So as far as next steps go, there's one simple step that folks can take to go ahead and protect their organizations and remote workers. And that step is just to schedule a risk assessment process consultation. And to do that, we can do that for you guys, for attendees of this discussion, free of charge by going ahead and scanning that code, or you can email us at secure@itsasap.com. We'll also put a link in the chat. Basically, this is going to lead to a 25-minute call. We're asked some questions about your current policies and related setup, and then we'll circle back with an action plan and a risk assessment report for you. No obligation. This is a $5,000 value, and we're offering that free of charge for attendees with no obligation. So I guess with that, I'm going to go transition. We got some questions that have come up, Earl, that I want to review with you. So let's get started there. First question has come in. How can I determine which risks are worth mitigating or investing in versus ones that I can just accept?
Yep, this is a great question. Relates directly to managing investment and those sorts of things. As business owners, I would say fundamentally the first question is to understand what obligations we might have in terms of protecting information in the context of our IT environments. That will steer us initially to where we need to focus our attention. Don't make any assumptions about what may or may not need protecting, but sort of think about it progressively like that.
Alrighty. Let's see here. Another question. How do I know that spending money to manage risk is worth it?
Um, Again, good question related to the first one. What we've got to do as decision makers in this context, as we move through our 4 phases, that assessment one being key, understanding the likelihood of risks being realized is fundamental. Now, here's the unfortunate or fortunate, depending on how you look at it, part that kind of makes decision making simple. If our web browsers are out of date and unpatched, we're at tremendous risk of having something bad make its way into our network, even if it's just an info stealer that's going to grab cookies out of that user's browser. So the investment piece at a fundamental level is very easy to sort of begin and focus on. Then you can sort of think about the business operations and the implications should certain types of systems or certain types of data be compromised. But there's always a reasonable fundamental investment that you ought to and can easily make decisions about right away.
So this next question is interesting. It's about cyber insurance. So if I go through this process of managing cyber risk, what's the impact on my cyber insurance?
So this will depend on your jurisdiction and other factors like that, you may gain some advantages from your insurance provider, maintaining or meeting certain standards for cybersecurity. We see that quite regularly and work with clients in that context. There's also some fundamental reputational protections that you can assure yourself that you've got in that context as well. So it's important to understand from your insurance provider what advantages they might provide you should you meet certain standards, and then kind of address it in that lane.
Yeah. Um, how do I know that my company is ready for a cyber emergency?
Good question. Not the kind of thing that we want to learn because it's happening.
Yeah.
So there are, again, if we think about our phases and the nature of this work being about proactively reducing risk, you can test yourself. Penetration testing, even tabletop exercises are a great way to understand your business processes and who's on first, what's on second sort of scenarios, should an event actually occur. I would always recommend that very, very strongly, tabletop exercise to sort of break down what would happen. If you're an organization that has an incident response plan in place already, you would exercise that in that context as an example perfectly.
Yeah. It's interesting because the vast majority of companies don't have an incident response plan. And, probably the worst time to start developing one is in the middle of a crisis. You want, ideally speaking, organizations are becoming more cyber resilient and they're doing the planning ahead of time. And you mentioned tabletop exercises, which are kind of like, going through live or scenarios that might occur and how would our, parts of our company or departments within our business respond. It just becomes a very enlightening exercise. And I think really helps kind of fine tune that incident response plan as it kind of evolves over time, because you're doing one of these exercises or scenario crisis planning maybe every once a year, every 6 months or so. And it really becomes really helpful
Yeah, it's just like practice for a team in a sporting context.
for sure. Let's see, another one came in. What's the impact? What impact will my business face if a supplier or a third-party vendor goes through a cyber attack?
This, of course, depends a lot on the nature of what just happened to that vendor. There's a few different scenarios that we see sort of repeating patterns, I guess you could say. So we, of course, may have had our data that was held by that third party compromised. That could have untold consequences for us. The simple metaphor comparison would be your credit card being stolen in a retail context. The same in the business to business context. Someone holds your credit card information and their systems are stolen. You get a notification that their system was breached and they provide you with credit protection. The very same kind of scenario or pattern in a business to business context, although here we have a few other considerations like reputational implications, and these things might be difficult to recover from over time. So yeah,
Mhm.
really the basics revolve around understanding exactly the nature of the attack that occurred and the nature of the data that they held.
Yeah. Another one came in. How long is it taking for a typical business to recover from a ransomware attack right now?
Yes, there are a wide range. Unfortunately, we've seen, and you can all find evidence of this in the news, of businesses that do not recover from a ransomware attack for a variety of different reasons. I would say on average, this is a multi-week recovery process. One of the key takeaways here has to do with your readiness to address an issue, right? So if you've got good backups, if you have exercised a response plan, your recovery time obviously will be much shorter. But generally speaking, it is weeks long.
Yeah, I've been hearing about roughly about 16 days on average, business days for a company to recover from a ransomware attack.
Mhm.
Got some more coming in. They're flying in here. Does old IT hardware, like that old Android smartphone that we talked about, present a risk or a vulnerability that needs to be managed?
It absolutely does present a risk. Any device, any account if that we bring into our environment sort of extends the threat or attack surface conceptually. Key here is the mention of an old device. So this is where we would be concerned about the unpatched nature of the operating system in particular, and the likelihood of there being vulnerabilities that can be leveraged against that. So absolutely. Any old, outdated hardware should be thought of and examined carefully for exactly that reason.
Yep. I got another one here. What can we do to ensure our web browsers are up to date and properly patched on a regular basis?
Good question. Most modern web browsers have features embedded that allow us to turn on auto updates. More often than not, is what you would be looking for in that context. However, so that's a given. You should absolutely do your best to have your browsers and all software wherein it's possible updating itself insofar as that is done. Additionally, for browsers especially, if you are able to pay attention to the news or have a partner who's providing you with insight into new vulnerabilities, there will often be moments, and we saw a bunch last year, where a manual update of your browser triggered before Google or whomever else pushes one is a great thing to be able to do. But that requires having your eyes on sort of the evolving threat landscape. So yes, set auto updates and be vigilant.
And I can say, just as an extension of that, having a third-party patching mechanism for your business as a whole. We have, as part of like, ITS Secure, it's our security platform. We have the ability to go ahead and patch third-party applications on a regular and scheduled basis, and even unscheduled basis, where in this case, a Chrome update comes out, we'd be able to push that out across a company's landscape and make sure that they're up to date and patched. Alrighty, so let's see if there's any other questions coming in. Give it another 10 seconds here. And I guess with that, I guess we'll start wrapping things up. Earl, just want to say thank you for spending the time and sharing that really, really valuable and insightful information. Hopefully that's been valuable for everybody out here. And I want to thank everybody for your time. Email us at secure@itsasap.com, and let's get a risk assessment process started so you can have a clear understanding of where your company sits from a risk perspective. Thanks so much. Have a great rest of the day. Thanks, Earl.